Today I'm going to be moving between threads that are to do with enlightenment in Western thought and contrasting and comparing it with Eastern concepts. And I thought I'd take a look at some key people. Many of these names came up during one of Albert Einstein's speeches appealing to the European powers against the power of the Nazis, when it was becoming clear to him what was happening and what was going to happen in Germany. And he made a speech at the Albert Hall to 10,000 people. But in it, he was talking about the freedoms that are taken for granted in certain societies, which give rise to enlightenment steps in the arts and the sciences. So the people that he quoted there were William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Louis Pasteur, Michael Faraday, and Lord Joseph Lister. And three other people I thought I would also add onto a list there, not because they're shining stars only, but to consider they also exemplify Western ideas of to do with progress and enlightenment. Therefore, Thomas Paine is one that I have heard extensively Christopher Hitchens describing and discussing, and worshipping is the wrong word, but admiring. Florence Nightingale is another one in English culture for sure, because of making strides forward in hospital care. I thought I'd have a look at Edward Said as well, because when we're dealing with East and West comparisons and everything, almost invariably or very often Orientalism, the accusation of Orientalism comes up. And I thought I'd put him a little bit under the spotlight. And there may be some other ones that I'll come up with, but let's start off with these people. And I want to sort of compare the Buddha and William Shakespeare, so that's not kind of that easy. First of all, let's take a look at some of the factors to do with William Shakespeare. Sorry. Let me just copy that, get rid of the box, and now do the categories, and now do the search. That's the right order. There he is. A lot of material on William Shakespeare. There he is. There's his sphere in amongst all of these studies. So let's zoom in to his sphere and some of the factors to do with him that we've got here. Let's just take a look from the top and work our way down. I'm going to push the sphere out and have a look at the top, the sort of pole part of it. These might be a bit bunched up, in which case let's have a look at it on its rotation. Employed cross-dressing male actors for female roles. That's right. It's a little bit bunched up, and so I'm going to expand this one first of all, and then go out and in again. Let's go across the pole part again. That seems to be working okay. Let's have a look at some quotations and some facts and trivia. First of all, love looks not with the eyes but with the mind, and therefore is a winged Cupid painted blind. It's a lovely rhyming couplet there. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Before and after, like a sandwich. Brevity is the soul of wit from Hamlet. All that glitters is not gold, the merchant of Venice. Glisters, actually says. There are some mysterious lost years in his biography, it says there. His tragedies explore the human condition. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. He explored themes of love, love, power, and ambition. Out, damn spot, Lady Macbeth. Yeah. The quality of mercy is not strained. Parting is such sweet sorrow. So he's a playwright, whereas the Buddha, there's a sutta called the Tala Putta Sutta. And that's where a person who had great aspirations for drama and the dramatic life, treading the boards, putting on the costumes, the wigs, and going forth like with the voice and booming out to audiences and screen backdrops and all that goes with drama. And he said, this person, Tala Putta, said to the Buddha, my father and my family have always said that is the peak experience. That if you die after living a life like that, you'll be reborn in heaven. To which the Buddha said, well, don't ask me. And so on and so forth. And he just wouldn't refuse. He refused to answer this question at first. Until he said, you just won't like the answer. So the person said, I don't care if I don't like it. I can take it. Tell me what's the truth. And the Buddha said, no, the actors tend to be reborn in the hell realms after they die. That's because they are... Life is already an illusion that most people think is real. On top of that, they are creating an illusion. So there's no such thing as kind of like, yeah, I was just acting as a mercenary, but now I'm back to being the real me in my real life. The Buddha said, no, it's all unreal. So you're putting confusion on top of confusion, and you are also inducing false reactions in people based on a huge fabrication, a huge pretense. So, yeah. But in the Western Enlightenment, Shakespeare's works are often, they do explore themes of self-discovery. They do include introspection and soliloquies, people talking to themselves, exploring their conscience. And there's a lot of themes of moral enlightenment within them. Characters like Hamlet and Macbeth, they do undergo profound existential crisis and also moral awakenings. In comparison to Eastern Enlightenment, when we compare Shakespeare's exploration of inner turmoil, self-realization, when we compare to the concept of enlightenment in Buddhism, where individuals seek liberation from suffering through self-awareness and seeking understanding, you can find somewhat parallels there. Another person is Isaac Newton, who is quoted as an enlightenment person. He's also a Freemason, but he's also moving in he's moving in a completely different world, one of the worlds that's considered enlightenment territory for the West, which is physics and invention and post sort of spiritual, because he's in the clockwork era of the mechanical universe, as it were, discovering gravity. Newton's discoveries challenged the traditional views of the universe. Kind of dangerous in that time. They're not that far yet away from the medieval Inquisition. And he promoted also rational inquiry, which is also counterpoint to blind faith and blind obedience in the will of God. They're looking behind the scenes. You know, it's as if they're probing through this fairy tale version of the universe that the powers of church have been spinning, and promoted rational inquiry and also empirical observation. And this is in common with the Buddha. There's a Jataka story. It's the first one actually, called Goblins in the Desert, but because it is a little fairy tale allegory, but in it the Buddha is teaching about empirical observation. The people on a trail across a desert are being persuaded by hallucinatory goblins to throw away their water, these sort of mirage-like hallucinations. They say, throw away all your water. You know, you can find some over the hill over there. And they're going to, but the Buddha says, wait, don't throw away any of your water. Have any of you actually seen with your own eyes lakes? Have you actually seen clouds that look like raining? Have you seen green foliage? Have you seen rivers, lakes? And they're like, no, we haven't, my Lord. And he says, well, unless you've seen it with your own eyes and touched it with your own hand, then would you have any common sense to believe that? So he's advocating using your own senses and common sense in that sense, in that story. So these are also key tenets of what's called the Enlightenment, as opposed to believing in afterlife and believing in invisible powers and in believing in dubious clergy. His laws of motion, we're talking about Isaac Newton. There they are, Newton's laws of motion, fundamental to physics. His laws of motion and universal gravitation ushered in an era of scientific enlightenment and modernity. He did go on, although it's kept pretty hush. He did also go on, though, to get very interested for about 20 years in alchemy. But as I say, the sanitized version of his life, that's not promoted loudly by his remaining family in the sort of Cambridge area. If we contrast Newton's empirical approach to understanding the natural world with the introspective and meditative practice of Eastern Enlightenment, where individuals seek spiritual awakening and liberation from ignorance, he was doing that. He was trying to get also to challenge the existing religious orthodoxy, and he has this also in common with the Buddha. Whereas he was looking outside, the Buddha was looking inside with equal amount of systematic rationality and meticulous observation. A very scientific mind, the Buddha, in that sense. But he was applying it to the internal taxonomy of the mind and its processes that generate suffering. All right, let's move on to another Western person who featured in Einstein's talk, appeal to the bright minds of Europe against the dark forces of tyranny, and that's Louis Pasteur. So Louis Pasteur, he has this Western Enlightenment connection. Let's have a look on the notes, the rotating notes. Friendships he had, and people he was closely associated with. A great public speaker, so he had this in common with the Buddha. And working on mainly infectious diseases, microbiology, immunology, bacteriology. And this was a great cause of suffering as the cities grew and civilization began to advance into the modern period. Bearing in mind, prior to this sort of time, you had, things like Charles Mesmer's ideas of magnetism, and before that, demonological possession as causes for harm. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about infection. They didn't know about microbiology. Ideas of gases and plasmas were, they were only being speculated about. So when people started to come in and take those speculations to task with measurement and then start to get it right, I can remember it was when I read one account where malaria, the spread of malaria, they thought was by marsh gases. They actually hadn't realized at that point that it was actually transmitted by mosquitoes, not the marsh gases. And that's an example of where ignorance of actuality is in the mainstream, and he comes along and does testing for truth, the real reason, and triumphs, and actually gets through to the real thing and the actual real reason in that case. Pasteur had groundbreaking work in microbiology and also germ theory. His work revolutionized medicine, no question, and public health, key. And it was advancing human knowledge and understanding. So in this, he also has common ground with the Buddha, but again, different approach. His emphasis, for example, on evidence-based medicine and scientific reasoning, that reflects the Enlightenment ideals of rationalism and progress. But it's being applied out into society, for example, with Napoleon's canned food for armies. So it meant that armies could be on their feet on tour, as it were, for much longer, because feeding an army is always a big thing. And often when they would try to can food, they would can the air in there as well. The idea of having a vacuum seal with no air was only discovered around those times. So you can see the difference. Here again, demonstrated the process of fermentation in beer and wine. So that leads to a boom in beer, a boom in wine. So it's one thing to have the brilliance of a breakthrough, but what effect is it going to support, and what effect is it going to enhance on human life? In one side, the example I gave about the canned food, it was designed and taken up largely and promoted and sponsored about the armies. So there's no way the Buddha would support that. He's a pacifist. And beer and wine, the Buddha had a precept to prevent Buddhists from taking wine. So science has this quality, doesn't it? It's like the atom bomb. It's like one thing is the technology and the brilliance, and then the finally getting to the answer of how you do that, how you get rid of those bacteria, how you get rid of that virus, how you get rid of, how you split an atom. But the consequences can be manifold. So you notice that the Buddha never talks about brains, because there's a risk there. Once people start getting the idea that mental health and suffering and stress, we should somehow be looking at the brain, you've just given license for a lot of people to have their brains, experimented on, like with the Nazis, by that kind of means, that, like with genetics and so on, you get all these sudden experimentations on humans, often living humans. So the Buddha's wisdom was to do what he did, which is he didn't mention this and he didn't mention this and he didn't mention this. In fact, he was against his monks storing up food. We could explore how Louis Pasteur's focus on empirical evidence and scientific discovery does parallel with Eastern Enlightenment's emphasis on seeking truth and seeking understanding through direct experience and observation. Keenly exploring, but as I say, with varying aims and objectives and results as well, regardless of the original intention. Another person who is in this sphere of science would be Michael Faraday. Let's go take a look at Michael Faraday's sphere. Also mentioned in Albert Einstein's Albert Hall speech to the intelligentsia of northern Europe. Let's have a look on the sphere. Founded the field of electrochemistry. Criticised for having a lack of formal education. Pioneered the use of electric motors and generators. He explored the relationship between light and magnetism. Light and magnetism. Huh? He said there's no shortcut to achievement. He said, I am nothing. Truth is everything. That's very good. That could have been the Buddha. I'm nothing. Truth is everything. Well, kind of. Not the Buddha didn't tend to be as general and mystical as that sounds. He invented the Faraday Cage. He founded the field of electrochemistry. Rivalry with other scientists over the priority of discoveries. Let's have a look. It's quite interesting doing this Royal Institution Christmas lectures tradition was initiated by Faraday. Faraday's constant fundamental in electrochemistry, and so we've gone down a little bit. Let's try zooming in about midway through. Nothing is too wonderful to be true. What? Nothing is too wonderful to be true. Nothing is too wonderful. Means true things can also be wonderful, I think. Apprenticed to a bookbinder in self-educated in science. Face skepticism for unconventional theories. Well, many people were very skeptical about the Buddha's wandering off to spend time as a wandering mendicant. Legacy of innovation in physics and technology. Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction foundational. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, like me. A real armchair savant here. Lived in Newington Butts. Face skepticism for we got that one. Let's have a look down a little bit. Disputed role in development of field theory. Allegations of scientific plagiarism. An allegation is only an allegation until it's proven. Anyone can make an allegation. But he laid the groundwork for modern electromagnetic theory. Unlike Charles Mesmer, who was guessing about the body's magnetism and its healing capacities and the earth, and so on. the Earth's magnetism. Demonstrated exceptional visual memory. That's interesting. Supported by physicist John Tyndall. And he was conducting experiments in his home laboratory. All right. Let's go on. So, Michael Faraday, his discoveries in electromagnetism laid the foundation for modern physics and technology, contributing to the Enlightenment's belief in human mastery over nature through scientific understanding. This is a big contrast often between East and West, is this idea of mastery over nature, very big in West. His commitment to empirical investigation and experimental method exemplifies Enlightenment principles of reason and inquiry. If we compare to Eastern Enlightenment, well, we could contrast Faraday's external exploration of natural phenomena with Eastern Enlightenment's focus on internal exploration of the mind and consciousness as a path to enlightenment and also spiritual liberation. So there's that East-West divide or difference of aim, difference of objective there. Another person in the realm of science would be Joseph Lister, Lord Joseph Lister. I grew up right next to something called the Lister Hospital, and in Hertfordshire, England, and that was named after him. There was also a Lister Hotel in our house, so I think in our town. He passed through, I remember, because I remember comments about the Listerine mouthwash being developed by him. It was even parodied in one movie I saw where he turns around to speak to someone at a doctor's convention, and the person recoils from his breath. And another person says, "Yeah, I know." Anyway, he must have known well about the phenomena of bad breath and I'm pretty sure it would have been very well spread around that time, was the stinky breath, because people weren't in the habit, and there wasn't such a thing as kind of toothpaste readily available. I think they had licorice sticks, which were a kind of wood that you chewed, which had a bit of an aniseed, hygienic, antiseptic quality. Lister's development of antiseptic surgical techniques revolutionized healthcare and exemplified Enlightenment ideals of progress through science and reason. It's the era when they weren't yet aware that surgeons who had been working in open wounds, when they go through to another part of the hospital and go touching a patient, are often transmitting diseases. His emphasis on hygiene and sanitation reflected Enlightenment values of improving human welfare through rational intervention. If we compare Lord Joseph Lister to Eastern Enlightenment, we get that Lister's efforts to combat disease and promote public health, if we compare that with Eastern Enlightenment's emphasis on inner purification and mental hygiene as a means to achieve enlightenment and liberation from suffering. Any of us who are familiar with one of the hospital dramas, whether it's ER or House MD or so on, get fully aware that people can be in a perfectly hygienic environment that's sterilized to the nth degree, but still they can have enormous mental stress and suffering and manipulation and depression and anxieties of all different kinds, simply based on their lack of inner purification, lack of mental clarity and, if you like, mental hygiene. It's a bit of a weird phrase, mental hygiene, but of having a good, clear, healthy mind. There are so much distortions in the Western mind, even though it would be surrounded by perfectly sterile environments. Western Enlightenment also went through many revolutions based on the ruling structures. There was a lot of eccentricity and abuse of power and entitlement via the hereditary systems of aristocracy, nobility, and so on. So the revolutions towards a more fair world, when that's what they were, not an ideology I'm not talking about here, played a big part in relieving human suffering of that kind, the kind of base that's as a direct result of unfair power distribution in society and resources and so on. Thomas Paine was someone I heard Christopher Hitchens talking about. He was an interesting character. Let's just take a look at the dome, the knowledge sphere here, to have a little bit of some facts about him, the sort of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's this quote here? "We have it in our power to begin the world over again," from Common Sense. In 1776, these are the times that try men's souls, from the American crisis. Criticism for perceived radicalism. He was perceived for perceived radicalism and atheism. Maybe that's why Hitchens gravitated towards him. He liked revolutionaries. Confronted by religious leaders for his deistic beliefs. I believe he was a non-deist. I'm not sure, I'd have to check that, but I know that Hitchens is an atheist or a non-deist, or a non-theist is actually what he is. Let's have a look at other ones. I'll just see if there's any other ones. Allegations of financial mismanagement and dishonesty. Advocated for social justice and human rights. He was with Benjamin Franklin, and also, let's have a look, the names will be here, with the signing of and the design of the American Constitution. Spent time in prison during the Reign of Terror. It's interesting, I wasn't aware of that. I thought he was in England. Oh, he was in England and Ireland, but then I think he got chased out for challenging the system. So I think he went to France and then he went to America, if I remember. It's very vague. Sorry, a while since I checked his stuff out. The Age of Reason caused controversy for its criticisms of organized religion. He emphasized the importance of reason and rationality in governance. Yes, he immigrated to America in 1774. Thomas Paine, we're talking about, wrote The Rights of Man, defending the French Revolution, and instrumental in shaping political discourse during the American and French revolutions. Reason obeys itself, and ignorance submits to whatever is dictated to it. The Age of Reason. It's not a field to a few acres of ground, but a cause that we are defending. The Common Sense pamphlet sold 500,000 copies. Friendship with activist and author Mary Wollstonecraft, where she was very involved with feminism in its earliest incarnations. He was an advocate for American independence from Britain. It is error only and not truth that shrinks from inquiry. Ooh, it's powerful. Quite a bit. You get the impression when you know, the more you find out about the Buddha's life, that he was also thinking along these lines, but he didn't ever move towards insurgent uprisings. He never believed in the use of force, and he believed in the use of persuasion, persuading people of all life that cultivating inner goodness and harmony would bring about great change, not top-down force. So but the usage of common sense over ideologies, beliefs, religious force, and challenging inequality and unfairness that causes suffering. So we see some common ground there, and that shows you a little thing or two about the Buddha and his mission, but his means of achieving it. You saw the era of terror in France. The Buddha anything that the Buddha did would never be able to be turned into that kind of revolutionary violence on the streets, whereas many people who believed in getting equality were responsible for mass murder, usually of innocent people. But that idea of the birth of a new order always carries bloodshed and cracking a few eggs or whatever it is. Thomas Paine's revolutionary pamphlets. So they advocated for liberty, for reason, and for social justice, embodying these Enlightenment ideals of individual rights and also democratic governance. But that often means rule of the mob, much as Plato, who wrote the Republic, he distrusted mob rule, which he'd seen responsible for the murder of his master. And also he believed in philosopher kings ruling. I'm talking about Plato there. So he's right. I'm only talking about how Thomas Paine was an advocate for democratic governance versus that kind of bewigged aristocratic class, ruling class kind of thing. His writings challenged established authority and promoted critical thinking, and these were hallmarks of the Enlightenment. Challenging established authority, just like the Buddha, promoting critical thinking, just like the Buddha. In fact, if you ask me, the Buddha promoted critical thinking over and above meditation. Usually he teaches not by giving meditation retreats where people stay silent, but through discussion, question and answer, and teasing out change and questioning people. So we could contrast Thomas Paine's, his focus on the political. The Buddha didn't focus on the political, neither did he want his followers to. And also Thomas Paine was focused on social reform. So was the Buddha, but only in a very covert, indirect way, not directly. And so Thomas Paine is contrasted there with Eastern Enlightenment's emphasis on personal transformation, and that let the rest take care of itself, and also inner liberation as a path to enlightenment and spiritual freedom. It's a very big difference than if you're trying to incite the mob with pamphlets. That's a Thomas Paine approach, even with promoting critical thinking and establishing authority. So another person, I know he associated with Christopher Hitchens while I'm on the topic of him. Edward Said was a thinker. Often this comes up when people know that I'm British and I'm traveling all around the world, including the Middle East and Asia, and and dealing with an Indian topic, fundamentally Buddhism. This, particularly in academic circles, I think without exploring too deeply, personally, many people don't seem to have really probed him in depth or thought about it from other angles. And I think there are reasons for that. Edward Said wrote a famous book, Orientalism, and he brought about this subject which criticized colonial, the use of academic intellects on behalf of the brutal regimes of the British colonial empire, which had their agenda, for example, with the Suez Canal or with the major ports around the southern Asian coastline, in order to sort of safeguard their trade routes using their navies across India, Sri Lanka, and up towards Myanmar, down past Malaysia, Malacca, Singapore, up to Hong Kong. So that was, there were definitely correct accusations where the romanticization, the romantic version of people who were like Arabian Nights, or their version of people, the descriptions of people given by many of the romantic style colonial poets and so on, caused a sort of patronized approach, attitude. However, he was definitely, I mean, his name is Edward, so, and he went to a school named after King George, and at that time, Jerusalem and the early establishment of what came to be Israel, that was very provocative for him, and therefore he sided to defend Palestine. And it's questionable how objective his work is versus being propaganda, that it's actually a form of psychological weaponizing, in this way that when those books are circulated in England and America, people who don't question its intent but simply follow its instructions, people will turn around and hate their countries and hate their friends, hate their parents. It's a book, and it's a kind of set of ideas and concepts which stokes hatred. It's meant to do that. So in my opinion, my personal opinion, having seen very good friends start to hate me after as a consequence of reading this book, which surprised me. These are very intelligent people, and I said to them, have you actually looked at the biography references of that book as to who he was reading and getting his ideas from? But they tend to be people like Frantz Fanon and Karl Marx, or Frantz Fanon's master, César Hamé. And they are people with a mission to attack Western culture. So that's not a balanced or unbiased bit of scholasticism in itself. It's simply a political or even a military agenda or a psychological warfare. It's, if people don't have jets and bombs and so on, which is also equally wrong. Do not get me wrong, I'm not defending colonialism whatsoever, but I also don't believe in using guilt tripping and emotional manipulation as a weapon, and that's precisely what's been going on in there. Again, the other side of it, like what Frantz Fanon saw and he was reacting to in Africa and in Mauritius and in the Caribbean islands with the French colonials or the American colonials or the British colonials, it was definitely, I'm not defending that whatsoever at all. But I also don't believe in manipulative use of media, and this is what I've seen in the books of Edward Said. He was a close friend of, or he got along well with Christopher Hitchens, again, back to him, where they were both felt the same, that Palestinians were being victimized, and probably quite fairly. There was a very small area originally offered to Israel. It was like 500 square miles, and that just seems to have, just gone, we want more. We're going to just take the whole place over. Edward Said, yeah. So Said's critique of Orientalism challenged Eurocentric views of the East and contributed to Enlightenment ideals of cultural pluralism and tolerance. His advocacy for Palestinian rights reflected Enlightenment values of human equality and social justice. So again, and the Buddha was very much an advocate for human equality and also for forms of social justice, not in the postmodern sense, though. If we compare to Eastern Enlightenment, we can explore how Edward Said's critique of cultural biases and power dynamics parallels Eastern Enlightenment's teachings on overcoming ignorance and delusion to achieve wisdom and compassion. Certainly the ruling class system with the Brahmins and power dynamics. Standing up for the little man, you saw that with the Buddha, but he wouldn't just hate all ruling classes at all. He would advise them on how to do things fairly and peacefully. And he would also do very subtle, he did a dream interpretation of one King Pasenadi, where through it, the king would walk away going, wow, I'm definitely going to be really fair, because of the sort of warning in the Buddha's interpretation of one of his nightmares. So that's a way of affecting things for the better, to fairly... He was basically... The king had dreamt a nightmare where he saw a bubbling cooking pot full of rice, but it was dry here and burnt there and soggy there, and lovely over this place, and the other bit was sort of not really done at all. And he said, what does that mean? And the Buddha said, it's about your kingdom being, the resources being equally and fairly spread all around. Like if you just get all the money is super saturated in one place, but not another place they don't have any money at all. And another place is abundant, and another place is sort of being really patchily provided with. This equal share. You see this in Perth, for example. In Perth, Australia, equally across the entire city, I've seen this equal standard of pavements, road surfaces, street lighting, parks, trees. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to see. It's an example of this, exactly what the Buddha was talking about. And then you compare that with somewhere like Manila, where you'll have a place like Makati, which is beautiful, wonderful, sumptuous. Right next door to it, a slum with a bird's nest of electric wires. And then a little bit down the road, lovely, a gated community with plenty of things and high-rise and swimming pools and wonderful, palm trees. And then the other side of that, slums. So it's very unequal, and it shows, and that is a cause for great unhappiness. Yeah. So one of the parallels there is this emphasis on how, but it's the means to do it. Like the Buddha was never manipulative and insidious in that kind of way. Let's have a look at someone else. Again, a very different target here. Have I spelled that right? I have. Where is it? Down here. Different emphasis altogether, different problem. When you have prisons and you have hospitals and people are coming back from wars with limbs shot off and shrapnel ripping out of their body, and the government are pompous, militaristic aristocrats, sending everyone off. When you have someone like her who is very good with statistics and can show using numbers, not emotion, what cost effectiveness is. This was the kind of person that Florence Nightingale was. Florence Nightingale. Meticulous record keeping and data analysis. So it's particularly this data analysis that impressed people around her in her time. Strong-willed, determined personality. Criticism for challenging traditional gender roles. Again, I see parallels with the Buddha. Very strong will, but calm, clear, very rational with both of them. Let's go up the sphere a little bit. I think we've covered most of that. Advocated for nursing education and professionalisation. Education is something the religious, devoted to religious faith and spiritual calling. Let's go around the middle section and see what we see. Debate over her role in reducing mortality rates. Influenced by mentor William Rathbone's philanthropy. Revered as a pioneer of evidence-based practice in medicine. Demonstrated compassion and empathy towards patients. This I remember very well through one description I saw of her, the lady with the lamp. But the soldiers, shell-shocked, they're coming back, they're miserable, they may have lost all their family or whatever, and having someone who's able to give that kindness and compassion, much perhaps like Master Cheng Yen of Tzu Chi Foundation. She'll be remembered for hundreds of years as someone who was a Florence Nightingale. But she constructs hospitals, for those of you who don't know of her, and has been a real pioneer nurse and social reformer also. She's a kind of Asian Mother Teresa, an Asian Florence Nightingale. So let's go up again one more level, which is the top of the dome, and see what we see up here. How very little can be done under the spirit of fear. Yeah, exactly. I like that. That's very vivid. Rather 10 times die in the surf, heralding the way to a new world, than stand idly on the shore. So, a real doer, a real advocate, and a real shaker mover. Conducted groundbreaking work in public health, confronted by gender biases in a male-dominated field. The Buddha was also challenging that with his ordination of women from all different walks of life and classes, which before that it was only the male Brahmins. They were all male order, as far as I know. For every depiction I've seen them has seen that. They were doing their animal sacrifices and very political, very involved with powers. Opposition from military and bureaucratic authorities, yeah, I bet. All right, let's take a look. Nightingale's, she was born in Italy, I saw her now. She was actually born in Florence. So I haven't seen that fact come round, but I saw it earlier on. I was kind of, I just assumed she was English through and through, born and bred. But she's actually Italian, according to what I saw. Let's go down a bit because we haven't had that fact. hospital sanitation. Also, the whole perception of sanitariness in some of those, especially in the medieval times, with their views of sin and God, and a lot of things were very twisted, and they really needed someone with a great deal of common sense. And there she goes, born on May the 12th, 1820, in Florence, Italy. All right. Nightingale's pioneering work in nursing and healthcare reform exemplified Enlightenment ideals of humanitarianism and social progress. Her emphasis on evidence-based practice and sanitary conditions reflected Enlightenment principles of rationality and scientific inquiry. If we compare Nightingale's focus on improving external conditions for health and well-being with Eastern Enlightenment's emphasis on inner purification and mental well-being as pathways to enlightenment and spiritual fulfillment. Yeah. So we could conclude and summarize this thread. We've been exploring how these historical figures have contributed to Western ideas of enlightenment and models of enlightenment. We could highlight similarities and differences along the way between these Western and Eastern concepts of enlightenment. You've got to note there are quite diverse approaches on achieving personal and societal transformation. But have further reflection on that, about the interconnectedness of these global intellectual traditions and the ongoing pursuit of enlightenment, which isn't a fixed thing in both Eastern and Western contexts. If you look, the East is developing Western products and services and ideas along those lines, and the West is doing the same thing too. We've got an expanding spread of dharma centers and teachers at the same time. So in a world, the whole world is benefiting not by an either or competitive, West versus the East, or mocking and dismissing either each. It's about the integration where we get a kind of win-win outcome of that. So thanks very much again. Let's go and zoom out and come back next time. I certainly enjoy having an explore through these and a summarization of my recent explorations around the dome, the domes of knowledge and all that. Okay, thanks once again, and take care. May you be free from suffering and avoidable harms.